Well, good evening. Thank you so much for coming to our first design talk. And it's a real thrill for me to have Michael BIERUT here because, you know, he's made an incredible difference to graphic design throughout the world, hasn't he? I mean, he's my superhero of graphic design. And tonight we have Yve Ludwig. She used to work here, you know. She was working as a graphic designer in this very building for a couple of years. And then she went back to Yale to study some more. And when she finished at Yale, she went and worked with Michael. So in a way, the fact that she's been working on designing our catalogue is a sort of return. And she knows all about the building and what it's like here. So to have them here to talk about it this evening is just a great thrill. So no more from me, over to them.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for having us here. Thank all of you for coming out to talk a little bit about design and about book design, about this exhibition and this catalog. It was a really interesting experience for me and Yve to participate in this way in what we think is a real landmark show here. It might be interesting to talk not just about why design now, the name of the exhibition upstairs, which I hope you've all seen, but also why design books now. In an age where increasingly we can get information through all kinds of different sources. You know, you guys are all sitting here watching us talk in person, but there's people that are watching this you know, on the internet right now who didn't even have to get dressed or go out or work their way up or down to 91st Street or even reside in the United States of America or anyone else. If they got a computer, they can participate in obtaining this information, and so it also is with books. There's good reasons for books to exist. You know, you can read them on the subway or anywhere else. That's probably the main reason they exist, but they serve some other functions above and beyond the actual, you know, ostensible function they have. You know, so you can use them for improve your posture or learn how to balance things. You can use them, you know, to adjust the height of seating when necessary. And this is the quintessential purpose of libraries. I know a woman who owns one of the best you know, used and rare bookstores in the city, and I'm astonished when she describes huge sales she's made to people who have moved into houses that indeed have a lot of built-in bookshelves, and they've dispatched their decorators to buy books to fill the shelves, just because it looks weird not to have books in the shelves. And so this is our very own library at Pentagram, and you can see that it's arranged, some of the shelves are arranged by color. That's our partner, Jim Bieber, an architect, who thought that'd be a suitable way to sort those books. It's not, even when they're not providing kind of, you know, decorative value to a room, the idea that that knowledge is available to you is very important. And we've worked in our office for about 10 years now on an initiative that the Robin Hood Foundation started up to bring school libraries to public schools in the 5 boroughs of New York, and almost entirely in schools that are in very underserved areas where this isn't a renovation of an existing library, but frequently the first and only library the school's ever had, and they serve not just the students in the school, but the communities. And the enthusiasm for this project has been such that we've been able to enlist all sorts of collaborators in it, including a series of artists that have included you know, Christoph Niemann, Stefan Sagmeister, and this library was the mural around the top shelves, above the top shelves, above where the tallest kid can reach on the high ceiling, was designed by Myra Coleman. And so it's really fabulous places that the people at Robin Hood will say that these rooms in the school are meant to sort of be, you know, not just the brains of the body of the school, but the heart and soul of it as well. And they are meaningless, obviously, without books on those shelves. You know, what makes them a library aren't the arrays of up-to-date, you know, some of the libraries from 10 years ago have all these really up-to-date iMacs sitting there, huge gargantuan, you know, candy-colored objects that now look like as quaint as Studebakers to people. But you know, this the books that never really go out of style, always look great. So there's different reasons to do these books. One reason is you're trying to create an archive of something. And Yve worked on this book that's basically a collection of Paul Goldberger essays from the New Yorker. And the interesting thing about this book for me is that I read most of the essays in the magazine originally, but when you read them in the book, the experience is very, very different. And I actually talked about this with Paul, and he said he too was struck by, just even when he was looking at the initial layouts, sort of the effect of them in this book. But basically what was in the weekly magazine, disposed of by most people after reading, is now kind of memorialized in a book, and I think that very act gives the content a different quality, although it's identical. Sometimes people have amassed a record of an event or a period or a personality. This is a book that we did called the Philip Johnson tapes. So this was a book that, if you don't know it, it's a transcript of a bunch of tapes of a conversation that Robert Stern, the architect and dean at the architecture school at Yale, had with Johnson, mostly back in the mid-'80s. Johnson was sufficiently candid in these tapes that he asked that they not be published until after his death, and it took it took actually a great deal of time to get them organized, transcribed, and then annotated so that they were meaningful. And I don't know if you can see it from on the screen, but one of the nice things that was an innovation that Yve came up with was footnoting the book, not with typical annotations or whatever you call footnotes. But yeah, footnotes. But often, Johnson will drop the name of someone he knew back in 1932, and then the organizers of the book would find a photograph of that person, and the footnote would be the photograph. Or in the case here on the right, you have his college transcript from Harvard, I believe, right? Yeah. And sometimes the same kind of subject provokes a reassessment. And in the case of Johnson, again, there was a symposium up at Yale that was a bunch of people kind of, again, I think in a way that could only be done after a person's death with real candidness. Did a series of lectures, a series of presentations, just kind of having different conflicting and provocative views of Johnson and his legacy. This is more of a conventional book, but the idea that these different voices have come together to create a different view on someone actually pays it off. So sometimes it sort of is not that kind of critical reassessment, it's a pure tribute. Again, this is a Yale project when the Paul Rudolph Art and Architecture building in New Haven was renovated, and beautifully so. They organized republished a bunch of writings by Rudolph and did this really nice small keepsake book that just brought together a bunch of essays, most of which had been lost, and Yve designed this very deliberately to kind of match the concrete of that building, so it kind of felt very Rudolphian, I think, even though the building is massive and the book itself is quite modest. This is one that was done with Rebecca Jimenez, who was a former intern at Pentagram, but now she's the head of design at the Whitney. And it's a monograph about the work of Daniel Libeskind. And it's authored pretty much by the architect himself, and the book is really, I think, meant bought by some students, but also bought by people who I think in their heart of hearts would like to commission a house or a building or something from Libeskind. But until they are in a position to do that, they will buy this book, and that will, tide them over until that other time comes. And so this is really just meant to be sort of like an object that sort of encapsulates an architect's worldview and work in a way. And we very deliberately kind of gave it a silver cover with multiple silk-screened elements on the front to make it seem extra special, right? So it sort of seems tailored the way that his buildings are. There's the idea that a book can serve as a legacy, again, within the world of design. Some of you might know a store called Design Research, which was up in Boston in the started in the late 60s and then came of age in the early to mid 70s. And this was really the first store that Benjamin Thompson and his wife Jane Thompson ran that actually established the idea of good design as a retail experience. That store has been closed for years and years and years now. You see its legacy. If you've ever been in a Crate and Barrel or even a Pottery Barn or anything like that, that's basically the progeny of Design Research, the single store originally in Cambridge, that along the way managed to be the store that introduced every one of the chairs you see up there by Alto, by Tonnet, by all these different people to a buying public. So these different roles that these books can play, obviously. Finally, one last role that a book that we did plays is kind of the idea that a book can use books to comprise or to create a biography of people. So there's a book called unpacking my library architects and their books. I don't know if you've seen this book. It's really, it's a weird little book, and when we were doing it, we sort of couldn't make head or tail of it, but when it was done, we realized that it was actually kind of cool and hypnotic. Basically, they went to how many architects?
10 architects.
10 architects, and asked them to kind of just let us photograph your bookshelves, and then pick out your 10 favorite books on the shelf, and sort of like just name what those 10 favorite books are. And it's sort of meant to be a travel log that if you like books and you're interested in design, if someone said, could you wait here in your library until Peter Eisenman can see you or something, you sort of do this thing and you look at all the books on the shelves just to see what kind of books this guy's got. So this book is a landscape book, opens up and more or less has these dead-on photographs of bookshelves with books on them. So it's just pure kind of meta book, a book about a book, and kind of this voyeuristic view into all these other books. So, and they kept saying we think it's going to be a real big seller, and it is.
It's a big seller.
It's a real big seller.
Reprint it.
Just don't you know.
Get one.
And so that comes to, you know, a list of all these different things. So you could be an archive, a record, a reassessment, trivia, trophy, biographies. It came to what this book was. And I think that one of the ideas that we had with this book was an argument in a way. It was an argument about the role that design could play, starting with the title. And to prove that, this was the notes that I took at the very first meeting with Chuck and Matilda and some other people that are here present. And you can see right there, I said, you know, it makes an argument. Design as a, design has a moral and social purpose. Listed the agenda topics that were there, and this was the sole sketch that we had at the beginning. We thought it would have generally rectangular in shape, you know, have a gutter in the middle, you know. So that was a big breakthrough in terms of form that we started with. And so, Yve, if you want, I'll click through, and if you could talk about, you know, when we started getting into the design process.
So as Michael started by saying, the point of this book is really to make an argument. And the point of our role as designers is how do we shape the book so that it best conveys the argument, makes people interested in the argument and engage with the argument in the book. So the things that we were trying to make this book do is to be enduring, to be provocative, to be useful and responsible.
And entertaining.
And
I would say, because one of the problems with any sort of charge like this is that it is really, it's what I call it, the broccoli problem, you know. It's, I say it's broccoli and I say to hell with it. You know, it's like everyone like wants to be socially responsible, but people also want pleasure out of design. That's one of the great achievements of the exhibition, I think. It sort of is a watershed moment where I think you don't look at these things and just sort of think, oh, how worthy this is, but they actually give you pleasure and surprise and amusement in some cases. And so we wanted the book itself to reflect that.
And so like most books, we began with a bunch of words, 370 images, and all of this is to represent 134 projects, which were meticulously selected by the curators, of course, and organized into eight sections by theme.
Which have good names, if you ask me. It's one of the great things. Someone actually complimented us about the names of the sections. Someone said to me, oh, the section names are so good. Because instead of like, instead of having these broccoli names, they actually are things that real people care about, prosperity, health, community. So it doesn't have sort of the kind of worthy-sounding names for worthy-sounding things. They're actually relevant and urgent-sounding things, paying off, I think, what the title is. And in fact, these are all answers to the question posed on the cover in a way, right?
And then, of course, there's the issue of sustainability, since the book is purporting to be about environmentally and socially responsible and forward-thinking design. And so most of this list are sort of the more obvious kind of standard practice things that are, go on now. FSC certified paper, soy-based ink, biodegradable shrink wrap, I think was a good idea. Carbon credits, great idea. And another idea that we added, which is a little less obvious, is the idea that if it's like a concise, purposeful book and one that people will engage with and perhaps keep, that in itself is a sustainable approach to design. Another approach that we're taking is that this book is really about an argument. It's really meant to be something that's going to provoke thought and people to really take it on and engage with. It's not a coffee table book. Instead, it's a reference book. It's really meant to feel more like a manual. Not that anything's wrong with coffee table books, but that's not what we were trying to make here.
And so this is for the connoisseurs of book design, a couple of...
the nerds.
The nerds. I didn't use that word. That was easier. So if you're curious, the typefaces are Griffith Gothic design. Who designed that? It's based on...
Both
they're both
Heffler
Furr Jones funds. Griffith is based on the original design of Bell Gothic for the telephone book that kid was sitting on the playing piano by C.W. Griffith in 1938, I think. Then Chronicles, a beautiful typeface that Jonathan Tobias designed for a real book text typeface.
Mm-hmm. The thought struck us that in a few ways the idea of highlighters and highlighting kind of came into play here. One is just, in the same way that students use their textbooks and you want to sort of mark it up and engage with it, highlighters work out well that way. And the other way is actually because it gave us a device for really showing the structure of the book. That these 8 themes would really sort of manifest themselves over the book and be really obvious. And so the foredge of the book ends up being sort of a map of the book. And sort of colorful, which freed the cover of the book up to be very sort of straightforward.
And I think this is the design that we showed to the curators, right?
Yeah.
So that was the cover. We had this as an idea in it. And then the sample pages we showed look like this. So if you know what the book looks like, so much for the design development process. I said,
design development goes from here.
No, but as Yve will point out, there's, all the details changed quite a bit as the real content started coming in, as we started really working with the structure. Things changed quite a bit as we went along. But the whole book, in a snapshot lays out like that.
Like that. And then came weeks, maybe months, of figuring out exactly how all of this would print. This is for the real nerds among you. But in order to get all of those highlighter colors, ideally they would be, real PMS spot colors, like really bright colors. But given 5-color presses that aren't able to do 2 spot colors at once, long story short, the ones on the top are actually process colors, and the ones on the bottom ended up being PMS colors.
Yeah.
And
but it works if you do the book, I think.
Definitely. Yeah. This is just the gory details.
Yeah, the lie, but even just, it's there's a part of doing design, and ask anyone who knows anything about all the work up there that's not glamorous and interesting. It's really a few moments where you sort of make a nice prototype, everyone says, yay, that's great, now go do it, and then this part goes on for weeks on end, actually.
Or months, actually, I think.
And this part as well.
As do the color proofs.
Yeah. And I have to admit, we had, through the whole thing, it's, the kind of support we got from the staff here at the Cooper-Hewitt was irreplaceable. And, everything we've said about the importance of books and the commitment to quality sort of is nothing we ever had to instruct anyone here about,
That's true. You can see there are actually 4 different handwritings in there, including one in Chinese from the printer, Chuck's handwriting, my handwriting. Yeah. And finally the book.
This is what it is. So if you haven't seen it yet, it's purposely very straightforward and understated cover. The real content are the the images and the text. These are the things that actually make the show, make the exhibition, and make the book worth having. And then that simple conceit of associating each of the sections with a different color is introduced there and kind of is anticipated by the ice cream sandwich experience you have, or parfait experiences you have looking at the side of the book. And then it also, I think Yve said, the process, we were trying to think about how to make a book feel like it's been worked on and used, the idea of highlighting it like that. A lot of the books that we showed before kind of have very pristine pages that you'd feel hesitant to make a little note in it in your own handwriting, but this was meant to feel kind of pre-violated for your convenience, to encourage your participation. And I think to bring that element of pleasure and surprise and enjoy into the whole thing. What's nice about it too is that I think the editorial conceit, which is so simple and so direct and so straightforward, that the curators and the people assembling the book put together really ended up driving the whole thing and kind of liberated us to make what I think is a very simple physical design in response to it. And one of the nicest things about it is these two black covers that sandwich all the content, ask the question on the front, and provide part of an answer on the back, but as back cover text is always meant to, it's meant to intrigue you and make you want to open it. We hope that all of you do as you go forward. So.
One more thing to add, sort of at the end of our little spiel here, is that most likely when I tell people that I'm a book designer, the first question they ask me is, so you mean the covers? And I say, no, I mean like the whole thing, the interiors, the cover, and they say, really? Like you design like the inside of the, like what's there to design on the inside of a book? So most of the books that we design are, books that require some amount, there are text, there are images, there are captions, but really the essence of it is not that different from designing an exhibition like upstairs. It's the opportunity to really shape the content in a way that makes it interesting and enduring and entertaining and approachable for a reader. And so that's really the joy of designing a book, and this book is really, to me, a really excellent example of it.
Exactly. So.
Well, thank you both so much. So I'd like to add a little bit of conversation from the other side of this project and ask a couple of people from the museum to give a very brief overview of some of their contribution, and then we'll open it up for discussion with everybody else. First, I'd like to ask Chuck Kim to join us on the stage. Now, Chuck is actually 40 years old today, so I think he deserves a special... He's also our one-man production house. So, it's amazing that he's the person who just is our publishing outfit. So in one person, we have the ability to not just take designs like this, but make them and have them produced and brought back. And the thing that's really remarkable about this effort in particular is the level of sustainability that is achieved. And I think you might be able to summarize that for you a little bit.
Really, there were two factors at play. First, we wanted to be as sustainable as possible, but the other thing was that we wanted to make the book as affordable as possible. We're a Smithsonian institution. We have lots of students and grandmothers and all sorts of people that we want to share our books with, and so we had to try to make the book not only sustainable, but also as affordable as possible. So balancing those two things is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to do. Yves mentioned that the book is FSC certified. For those of you who don't know what FSC certification is, FSC is the Forest Stewardship Council, which was begun in 1993 as a result of discussions held at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. And really what it does is in over 50 countries around the world, it's a non-governmental, non-profit organization that makes sure that people who are harvesting forests are doing it in a way that is responsible to the environment and also to the people that live in those forests. And the paper that we used for the book, which is called the Murim paper, it's made in South Korea from sustainably managed forests. It is 100% mixed and 30% post-consumer waste recycled paper. We used soy-based inks, and that is because by a company called Toyo Inc. that started an environmental management division in 1973. So they were way ahead of the curve in terms of environmental responsibility. And using soy-based inks rather than petroleum-based inks means that during the printing process, the ink releases less VOCs into the air, so it's less harmful to the environment. We held a competition among 7 printers in 6 different countries: Iceland, Italy, the United States, Japan, China, and Korea. And the company that won the competition was a company called Topan, which is sometimes it's the world's largest printer or the second largest printer in the world. And it has 15 printing plants in Japan that are absolutely zero energy. Just incredible what they do with their printing. It's the only printer named in the Global 100 most sustainable companies in the world. And they have an FSC certified printing plant in Shenzhen, China, where the book was printed. And so basically, not only is the paper with which we printed the book FSC certified, but the entire process, from the moment that Topan actually receives the paper into the plant, how they process it, how they treat the paper, how they cut it, and also even how they print it, how they bind it, how they pack it, how they ship it to us as finished books. Everything is certified by the FSC. Topan is an FSC chain of custody company. So even without being an expert in sustainable or environmentally responsible printing, you can work with companies like Topan and others. Mohawk Paper is a wonderful example of an American company that does wonderful work with sustainability. So even without having the expertise, as long as you buy products that have the FSC label, or if you work with companies that are FSC certified, you can really make sure that you're doing your part for the environment. As my 4-year-old daughter Charlotte says, save the trees and the flowers. So it's very important to all of us. One thing that Yves mentioned earlier was that we've even used a shrink wrap, because a lot of times what happens is, well, for books like this, expensive books like this, you can go FSC certified, but then as soon as you put on the shrink wrap, you've ruined or undermined what you're doing, because the shrink wrap is poisonous to the environment. And we were able to find a fully 100% biodegradable, recyclable shrink wrap that's actually made in China. Wonderful product, so that, you know, even down to the shrink wrap, it's the pallets that the books were shipped on were on recycled wood. It was an amazing experience to be able to learn about all these things and to experience firsthand how we can actually produce a book like this and still, you know, like you said, add to the conversation, add to do things that are provoking thought about, you know, why we're here and what we're consuming and why.
Thank you. Last, we'd like to invite Matilda McQuaid to join us on the stage. Now, there were 4 wonderful curators for the exhibition upstairs, Cara McCarty and Ellen Lupton, Cynthia Smith and Matilda. But Matilda's going to spend a few minutes representing the 4 of them today to give a little bit of the story of what it's like on the curatorial side of this effort.
I think with this book, as opposed to sort of other triennials, we really wanted it to not only reflect the theme, which you've heard about, of this triennial, but also it was going to be very different from the previous triennials in the sense that it wasn't so much, it was about the designer, it was celebrating the designer, but it was also kind of our process in discovering this was through the projects themselves. So with the other triennials, we've always kind of chosen designers that are significant in some way and then represent kind of a whole sort of collection of their work. But with this triennial, we just focused on the projects and then celebrated the designer or designers of that project. So we decided we kind of wanted it more like a dictionary or an encyclopedia that really was, as Yves outlined, kind of a resource for people. So it made it a little bit different. And the other way that it was different is that it was also the first triennial that we opened officially internationally. So we have 44 countries represented. So we wanted to kind of just keep all of this in mind and really create something different. In fact, in our very early discussions about this, we decided, well, maybe we shouldn't have a catalog. Maybe it should all be in keeping with, again, with the theme of the show. Maybe it should be a CD, or maybe we should do print on demand. So there was all these sort of questions that we were asking ourselves and each other about how to kind of follow the theme, but at the same time, you know, be able to kind of, with the triennial, we're always frustrated that we can't get the most contemporary, I mean, like something that happened just yesterday in the book, and we want the book to reflect the exhibition. So this was a way, if we did print on demand, we could do it very quickly. We could do it, you know, we could keep adding to it. People would keep buying it. So there was lots of, you know, kind of various discussions. But then we ultimately decided that there is a need. People always want to know. In fact, I was discussing this with Andrea yesterday. People always want to know, is there a book with an exhibition? They always ask this question. And so ultimately we decided we wanted a book. And we wanted it to be part of the triennial itself. We wanted it to be designed by someone who is represented in the triennial, which we did in the last triennial as well. So it becomes a piece of the exhibition. And it was really hands down Pentagram. I mean, but we had to do a 3-person kind of RFP. But we knew that they would kind of take kind of our desires and our wishes and really translate them into this book. And from the first meeting, it was all very agreeable. We didn't fight or anything, right? And we also didn't want it a doom and gloom book, because sometimes the subject matter can be really gloomy and depressing. And I think that's what's so wonderful about the book. It kind of has that initial feeling like, it's serious. But then when you open it up, it's like this bright kind of, vivacious interior. So you don't have that kind of depressing feeling about these incredible projects, which are all very forward-thinking and I think positive. So, and the only other thing I would like to just say is that, which the designers didn't say, is that conceit too. It was the highlighters, which I loved, is designers, I think, always hate captions. They're kind of loaded with all this information that we curators love to kind of put in to make sure that everyone knows everything about that particular photograph. But they become bulky. And by having that kind of highlighter, they highlighted the text that talks about the image. So therefore, you don't have to have a caption. It's magical. If you look at the book, you'll see it's very airy and light. And I think a lot of it is because it's very much highlighted in the text, and you don't need those captions. So anyway, it was a wonderful collaborative process. I felt that they, took our ideas, what we wanted, and just, they translated them perfectly. And the only thing that I wish that I had seen all this sort of the process stuff, because I love seeing these images of all the sketches, and I think we missed out on that. But anyway, it was a great collaboration.
We've got a lot of people managing to collaborate across disciplines and roles to achieve a goal here, which is lovely.
So a question from one of the nerds. I was just curious what went into choosing the typefaces. Like, why choose Chronicle rather than ITC Garamond?
Oh, I love IT. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, a question from one of the nerds. Why did you choose those strange typefaces?
Well, I think Griffith was to link it to, that was sort of a given, or at least we accepted it as a given, because it was already chosen as the signature typeface for the exhibition. And then I recall looking at a bunch of different choices. If you want to get really nerdy, what were the runners-up?
The short is Mercury.
Mercury, yeah. So
I forget what else.
Yeah, no, we looked at like paperback or something like that. We wanted to sort of have this like regular, just like not like, we didn't want it to. I hate to say this, we didn't want the typeface to seem interesting in a way. We didn't want it to seem like it was sort of like designers trying to like make you sort of think, oh, wow, I wonder what that type. I mean, thank you for wondering what the typeface is. But it was supposed to actually, in a way, I think, be a foil for the highlighting and the other stuff that was happening to it. So it just kind of seemed like a, kind of steady state typeface as opposed to anything trickier. And the Chronicle is really a lovely, lovely, robust, kind of workmanlike typeface, I think, that was designed exactly for this purpose, too.
So what he's doing really is just contradicting me and saying, they're not strange.
Well, typefaces are strange, period. And people that ask about typefaces are strange, present company excluded. But typefaces themselves are usually fairly harmless.
So who else? Yes. She asked about the size, and was sustainability part of that choice?
Well, Ellen Lupton designed the first 2 triennial catalogs, and we wanted to stay with the same size, more or less, of the previous 3 triennial books. And so 2006 was the same size as 2000 and 2003, so we thought we would, because it's a series, it's an exhibition series where we feel that each exhibition builds on what's come before, and for the publications as well. So that was probably the main consideration for the trim size.
I like Michael's succinct description of the form on the first page of Sketches. a little rectangle. There were no dimensions, though.
Yeah, and I have to admit, we also, I mean, sometimes you have an idea for a book where a distinctive size actually seems critical to kind of make it work. And in this case, we were, again, just as we were with some of the givens with the typeface, say, I think, knowing that it was going to be a complement to this ongoing series, a series that would extend indeed beyond this book, and seemed to really be a great reason to kind of keep it that same size, in hopes that, people, a library might have a whole series of these, and then eventually you'd have this grand magisterial kind of survey of how design has changed over years and over decades, represented by both the content and the design of these books, but with the regularity of the size, making them all seem continuous.
It also turns out that the size that the books were is 8.5 by 11, which is the standard size of a piece of paper, which in another way makes it sort of like not like designy in a sense.
Yeah.
It's like, it is what it is. It's a straightforward way of giving you the content.
Just to repeat the question, are the future books that we produce going to have the same level of sustainability?
We first started this with a book called Design for a Living World, which was for an exhibition that we did here last year that opened in May 2009 with the Nature Conservancy. And the Nature Conservancy being what it is, they asked us, and we were already having discussions in-house about how we can be more environmentally friendly with our publications. For instance, everything that we print, whether it's annual reports to newsletters to invitations to pretty much everything that we print here, it's FSC certified. So when TNC came to us and gave us the challenge of doing the most green book that we could do, a lot of investigation happened there, and we realized that it actually, there's a misconception that being green and printing green is much more expensive than printing regularly, and we found that it was not at all the case. In fact, I'd say of the 18 books that I've published here, the last 2 are not more than 2 or 3% more expensive than the cheapest books that we've produced here. So it's something that we feel really good about, and we're going to continue doing.
But I think when you see that book, you don't think, wow, this really feels like a case study in sustainable printing.
No.
It feels like almost a little bit luxe and kind of luscious, we hope. And so, which I think actually just has to do with a certain coming of age of this sort of thing. As Chuck said, it's not more expensive to print it that way, and it's, in a way, it should just really be like not a stunt that you do as a one-off to kind of demonstrate your virtue when it's thematically appropriate, but something that just becomes part of your way of working, and something that as we do, we do projects in our own office that aren't meant to, aren't required to be demonstrations of sustainability. We try to increasingly bring those same values to it. And the funny thing is, you mentioned Mohawk paper before. I remember way back when recycled papers was like a thing, having a tour there and saying, and they were doing one of the earliest recycled papers, and I saw the result, and I said, well, this doesn't, why doesn't this look like recycled papers? Because everyone is coming out with these recycled papers for designers and swatch books with pictures of acorns and squirrels in the front, And then and the papers always have these like little nubby things in them, so you sort of knew they had this kind of granola flavor.
Right,
So it was of course rubbish. And Laura Sturz, you made the tour, said, oh no, you have to, you buy that stuff separately and it comes in bags and you pour it into the pulp to kind of give it that recycled look. And I just thought, oh my God, they've never done that, which God bless them, but I think that sort of, we've really made it way beyond that era where kind of the recycled look is something that you're kind of like featuring because it's in fashion. I think it just becomes part of the way you live and work.
Yeah, I think it's more than just wanting to make sure that our future print is sustainable. I think, we want to be a national design resource as well as a great design museum. And one of the things we can do in that regard is help people with understanding those sorts of things, give you the toolkits, give you the knowledge, so other people can perhaps know more easily how to achieve a result which is sustainable, but doesn't have to look that way. So what are the barriers to sustainable production if cost is not a barrier?
In my experience, a lot of business simply has how do I put this? They've worked out a production method that is, habituated, sort of certain ways of doing things. And, in book design, in book production for one thing, as an author or a content provider is pitching the idea for a book, a good acquirer, someone who acquires books on behalf of a publisher, is able to kind of do the math really quickly in their head. This is going to be X many pages long, this is going to have this trim size, I can probably sell it for this much, and I can probably get Barnes & Noble to buy this many copies of it. And each one of those calculations is sort of based on a standard operating procedure. And up till recently, I sort of had the experience that publishers just hated getting nudged off any part of that standard operating procedure. A lot of them did, at least. There's always been adventurous ones who were more experimental in nature, but standard issue publishers, a lot of times you'd say, could it not be 8.5 by 11? Could it be 8 3/4 by 11? And they, no, we'll check. No, we'll check. No, we check. You can't. No. And really, it's because, and it has nothing to do with any of the reasons that this book is a size. It just has to do with the fact that no one wants to go back and recalculate it because it's all just plugging in the same numbers of the same things, the same set of papers, the same set of printers, the same set of materials you use. Now, what's interesting about right now, and this happened for the first time last year with a couple of books we worked on. Publishers who previously were resistant to change actually came to us and asked us, not always for environmental or sustainability purposes, but they'd say, is there something that we can do to make this book more special? Can we make it like in a funny size or do something funny to it? And the reason is, I think, the pressure they're feeling is less. In a way, it sort of is a sustainability issue. It's sort of like in an age where people don't need to buy these books as much anymore, where if you need if you want access to that information or access to those images, you have options, that are largely digitally available, so having a book only makes sense if there's something special about the physical object. And so I think in a way, if we designers, and if we all played our cards right, you could actually kind of play both ends, the desire for specialness and customization on one hand with sort of, the ability that gives you to more closely fine-tune the actual production method. I think you're able to kind of bring them both together a lot more. And again, you sort of, what you want is a society that kind of demands that, as a matter of course, as opposed to just kind of wants it for special occasions.
Yeah, I think if you look at the impact of the digital invasion on book publishing, the first wave was that the publishers were just under pressure, and because they felt they had to be more productive in order to survive. So the people would just give you a standard answer and say, no, it's got to be this size, because they didn't have time to look up another one. Yeah. It was going to be a bit of effort to change. But the second wave, which is really upon us now, is that digital publishing has reached the level where you really can get a lot of informational stuff from non-book sources. You can use your iPad, you can go to ebooks, you can go online. So if you just want the information, it's going to be more useful probably to get it electronically. So why do you want a book? Well, you want the book because it's going to be more beautiful. It's going to be a greater experience. It's going to be lovely to read. So and that's great news for designers, I think, because for a book to survive, it's got to be beautifully designed.
And for those of you who don't want to buy the book because you're worried about the trees that were killed in order to make it, we're making the entire book available online, chapter by chapter, on our website. So every single week, every Monday, I think, we're posting a chapter. So I think we've got 3 up there so far, and we've got another 6 to go.
For free.
Yeah, so
For
that
free.
goes back to a Dickensian sort of model of serial publishing then. Very progressive.
So what was the choice in picking a Korean
Paper.
paper instead of a domestic one?
The paper that was chosen, actually, Michael and Yve had picked a paper, and it was a Mohawk paper, an American-made FSC certified paper. And unfortunately, that paper was not available in Asia at the time that we were printing the book. And so we chose a paper that was more readily available, and to have shipped an amazing amount of paper all the way by ship all the way to China just to print that book on that paper would have added a lot. I mean, The book is environmentally responsible, yes, and we bought carbon credits, so the book is carbon neutral, but we bought carbon credits for 250 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. So, you know, it's not a totally carbon neutral project. We bought credits which are going to fund wind farms, solar farms, places that are going to help decrease carbon dioxide emissions. But ultimately, we do pay a price for printing something like this.
One here. She enjoys the color coding of the different sections, but wondered if they considered any other ways of separating the sections.
Wow, you know, I think, you know, I feel sheepish because, you know, I think there's an image of the design process as this vast exploration of limitless possibilities, this careful culling of those possibilities. I actually, I mean, you know what's funny? I remember thinking, this is like, I remember looking at it and thinking, oh, this goes too far. You know, this is what I would like. You know, this is like bang, 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 really direct. But you know, dignified curators aren't going to want these lurid colors and highlights all over a proper catalog. And so I think we sort of went in thinking that we'd retrench, that we'd figure out our options after our first preference was shot down, and to our surprise and delight,
We loved it.
it was embraced. Yeah,
Absolutely, we loved it.
and there are obviously other ways to do it, but that seemed like, you know, one of the problems with a book like this, not to continue on the more connoisseurship level, to not call it nerdy again, but I think it's a challenge to do a book where the content is coming from all different places. So all those photographs you saw came from, let's see, you know, I mean, every one of these images largely came from a different source, you know, and very few sources were, I mean, they were all obtained by the curators and the staff and everything, but they're all just a bunch of different, right, did I pass the, oh, there we are. Like, you know, they were all sort of like, you know, send us a picture of that bike. I don't think there was no photo shoot that the museum funded, right?
Just a couple
just
of
like
things, materials,
yeah,
but that
so,
was it. Most of it was from the designers.
Right, so the biggest challenge then, one of the big challenges was, and I think we sort of just, you know, managed to kind of solve it and make it go away was, you know, there'd be no continuity in the image type, even things that are the same, garments, photographed in a very different style, wearable things for a different style, and objects and architecture all photographed largely by the designers or the manufacturers, and so that sort of argues in favor of some big gestures that will kind of link everything together, and I think the colors actually help do that too, because the pictures, if you actually look at them, and you should actually look at them, they really vary one to the next,
Well, one of the things that I'm thrilled about being here is because I have a bunch of curators here who love the lurid.
Yeah.
One last question, or? Maybe we're done then. Thank you.
Thank you so much.